right now at Williams called, oh, I'm sorry, she wants to know how we deal with characters with different races in our books, how we deal with the nuance of different races. I'm teaching a course at Williams right now called Imagination and Authority, which is sort of who gets to write about what, which is a pretty hot topic amongst the literary. Yeah, okay, come on in. So I think what's happened a lot recently is that your authority is based in experience. So, we give Junot Diaz the right to write Drowned because he's writing about immigrants from the Dominican Republic, and he is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. And this argument of authority based in experience comes at the problem from a couple of angles, I think. For example, writers of color are not equally represented in mainstream publishing. That's just a fact of statistics. But the argument is always made that we need, the white guy needs to stop writing about race because there's another person of that race who could tell that story. The implication there is that that person of that race would want to tell a story about that person's race, which is another argument based in experience. So my feeling is, I think imagination is the primary source of authority in fiction, and I love to see a book where I am writing about something completely other than myself and discovering the ways in which it is not all that dissimilar from myself. So, I get to have it both ways. I'm half Russian Jew and half Chinese, so I guess I can only write about half Chinese Jewish people. That book hasn't been written yet. I grew up mixed race, and I grew up, though I don't speak Chinese. My mother speaks 2 dialects of Chinese, but she never spoke it to me. My dad spoke Yiddish, I don't speak Yiddish. In many cultural ways, I am white. I grew up upper middle class, so part of what almost all of my books are about in some way is that liminal space of being mixed and things not being clearly one way or the other, and I'm sure that has to do with my experience. But I think, the best work is, it's all emotionally autobiographical, whatever you're writing about. And I want to celebrate somebody who wants to take the care and time and attention to get it right, to imagine whatever they want to imagine. So when I hear we don't have enough writers of color, I totally agree. But I don't want to prescribe what they need to be writing.
I think a really important thing that often gets overlooked in this conversation is sort of that you can do anything that you can get away with. And there's a difference between sort of writing the book and sort of convincing the reader. If you write the book and you convince the reader that this is well done, and lots of people do this and write outside of their own experience or write outside of their own race, nobody raises any questions about it because that you've done your job as a writer. And a lot of times I think the question, when you read a book and you're like, oh, this doesn't ring quite true to me, that's where I think the problem is. But that's not a problem of
Race.
That's not a problem of race,
Yeah.
and that's not a problem of sort of permission or being allowed to do it. It's really a problem of writing.
Yeah, it's a lack of imagination.
And it's a lack of sort of getting deep into that empathy. And so, and I'll come in a minute, Margaret. I feel like, similarly, I'm not mixed race, but I grew up in areas where I was the only Asian person. And so my parents, likewise, were immigrants but didn't speak Chinese to me. And so I don't speak Cantonese. And whenever we go to do Chinese things, I don't know what we're doing. And, I'm like, I should know this, and I don't know this, and anything I do, I've sort of consciously studied this. So similarly, in a lot of ways, culturally, I don't feel the connection to, Chinese culture that people might assume that I have. And so, likewise, a lot of my work has to do with sort of questioning that space between sort of how you pass culture on or where you're expected to be, or this sort of overlap or the gap between those things. And that's for me sort of the comfort zone that I found. If I were to try to write a book about Chinese American immigrants who felt a stronger kinship to their Chinese culture, I don't know that I would do it right.
Yeah.
Because, and it's not that I don't have the right to do it, and it's not that I shouldn't do it, but I don't know that I, at this point, am able to sort of imagine my way in the way that it would need to be done. And I feel like that's actually the question that writers and readers should be asking, which is sort of like, did you really get at
Did you get it right?
what that experience is, right? Rather than are you allowed to do this? Because I think that's actually sort of pointing in the wrong.
And I think
direction.
in terms of actual I was thinking about this actually. What race did you assume Mia and Pearl were?
White.
How come you assumed that?
Yes. So let me let's do this by show of hands. Who assumed that Mia and Pearl were white? I'm curious. All right, and who thought that they were people of color? Okay, so this is interesting because a lot of people have asked me this question.
Yeah. Now, what's great is part of the reason those of us who thought they were white is because when we, as a mainstream white world, read books, the default position is unless I tell you otherwise in my character description, they're white.
Yeah.
And it was about halfway through the book where I thought, I'm not sure what I'm picturing when I picture Mia and Pearl, and then I kind of wrestled with it in my head. You know, I was sort of like, and I finally decided if they were black, Mrs. Richardson would have talked about that. And so
That's right.
yes, right? So I know everybody who's black is mentioned as black by the characters in the book, not by the omniscient narrator necessarily.
And she justifies who she rents the house
Right.
to by their condition, and she would have mentioned it.
Right, right. So I think in terms of characters that are racially identified in some way, part of what I'm trying to do is expand my own definitions of what it means to be those things. So if I say, oh, you didn't get it right about being Chinese American, what does that mean? Is there like a checklist of like, you know, what it means to be Chinese American? So I'm, you know, someone once said to me, and this is a colleague at a very good liberal arts institution, said to me, she goes, okay, you identify as Asian American, fine. So she was Chinese, and then she said, but you don't read as Asian American, you read very powerfully. And I thought, that's a lack of imagination on her part in terms of defining what she thinks of when she thinks of Asian American. And that's sad. Like, in other words, I should be able to think Asian American, think powerful. Then she said to me, and then I'll stop talking. Then she said to me, I think it's because of who you're married to. She wanted to associate my power with my husband. And I said, maybe I am just super powerful. But this was a woman who felt very isolated by her race in a small white town. And part of the reason I think she feels isolated is because she's narrowly defining what it means to be Asian American. So.